Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is day 3 of the CEPHaS virtual conference, and we are so very happy to have you here, for those returning and for those new ones that have joined us. Today is the final day of the conference, and we will be looking at monitoring water in soil, crop and aquifer, and capacity strengthening. We have 2 external speakers this morning, Ms. Marthe Wens and Dr. Loon from the Vrije University of Amsterdam. And we have 6 talks from our own team. We will be having a break at 9:35 GMT until 9:50, as we have done in previous days. And we would ask you to please put any questions you have with regard to the presentations for the speakers in the Q&A. And if you have any comments or if you'd like to introduce yourself, please use the chat facility. Also, if you have any problems with connection, you can contact us via the chat facility and just send a direct message to the host. I am going to pass the reins to Professor Lark, who is the PI on the CEPHaS project, and he will be introducing our keynote speakers for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessia. We're very grateful to our 2 keynotes this morning, Marthe Wens and Dr. Loon from the Vrije University of Amsterdam. And the talks that they're going to give us in this first session, and I'm introducing them both at this stage, and one will follow on from the other. The talks that they're giving us are of considerable interest to the CEPHaS team. The first talk from Marthe is about droughts and floods in the Limpopo basin, and bringing together information and impacts of climate change. Changes in drought and flood frequency are, of course, a big motivation for what we're trying to do in CEPHaS, and understanding the physical implications of changes in farming systems. And then Loon's presentation, the second part of our keynote, is more general. It's stepping back and looking at the education, financial incentives and awareness to reduce smallholder farmers' vulnerability. So it's trying to integrate through modelling. And this again is something that we're very interested in CEPHaS, whether it's from soil physics or hydrogeology perspective, or indeed from an economic perspective, using models to pull information together to ask about implications for smallholder farmers of changes in practice under climate change. So thank you again to both our speakers, and I'm sure that they will be giving us a very interesting talk, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me share the screen. So first of all, I'm Marthe Wens, and together with Dr. Loon, I work at the Institute for Environmental Studies at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And since we closely work together, we actually decided to switch talks. So I will be talking about education, financial incentives and awareness. And Loon will talk about floods and drought in the Limpopo basin, but well, same talks, it's just switched. Can you see my screen that I shared? Yes?
Yeah.
But so we all know that, well, climate is changing, also population dynamics are changing. So if we talk about drought risk developments over time, we know for quite well how the future climates will change, so the hazard side of this. And we know the exposure side of this, the people, the population growth. What we know less of is how the dynamics of sensitivity and coping capacity of people facing droughts will change over time. But if we want to reduce current and future drought risk, if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to understand how this drought risk, so all 3 components of this drought risk, will evolve over time. And so that is something we were doing in our research group on droughts in the Institute of Environmental Studies. We try to include these dynamics of vulnerability in our risk models. And many risk models actually either assume that people do not change over time, their adaptive capacity does not change over time, which of course is an overestimation of the risk and an underestimation of how flexible humans can be. And also other risk models, they assume that people act as homo economicus, as purely economic rational, without any barriers to information, without any other type of barriers to financial markets and other markets. And of course, we also know that this is not exactly what we observe. There are barriers to the adoption of certain adaptation measures, more than only rational, also perception barriers, biases in knowledge, biases, and other heuristics. And so these bounded rational factors, that is something we try to include in our models and our risk models. So what I did for my PhD research is I created the ADOPT model, an agent-based model that simulates individual adaptive behavior, individual agricultural drought risk over time, and it adopts a social hydrological perspective on the human water system. So it includes humans and the water system as part of the same system. And so what this ADOPT model does is, on an annual basis, it simulates maize yields on the farmers' fields. And then it evaluates, well, how does that influence the harvest of these farmers? If there was a drought, the maize yield will be low, so there will be less income to the farmers. And that potentially influences the perception about droughts for these farmers. And then ADOPT has a model that includes the adaptation decisions, and it tracks which farmers would, based on their context, on their social and environmental context, would make decisions about new adaptation measures. Of course, the farmers that actually decided to adopt a new adaptation measure, they would implement it, and that will influence their crop yield, their maize yield in the next years, because their farm system, their farm water management has changed. And so in that way, ADOPT is like a two-way coupling between the agricultural system or the agricultural production system and the human adaptive capacity system, both through impacts of droughts and also through adaptation decisions. So we applied the ADOPT model to a case in semi-arid Kenya, so in Eastern Africa, where in Kitui there are quite a lot of smallholder farmers with quite small farms, like 0.7 hectare. They have a brand of maize or a variety of maize called Katumani. And so we applied our model to this specific case. We also know that in this region, many obstacles for adaptation exists. And so that rural households actually experience regular phases of food insecurity, and this causes also quite high poverty levels. So in our model, the agents, the ones that are actually behaving in our model, these are the farm households, based on the Kitui case. And so the ADOPT model replicates, in this case, 4 on-farm adaptation decisions. It replicates or simulates the adoption of mulching, of terraces. In this case, in the Kitui case, it's called the F.Nguyen terrace. It also replicates the adoption of shallow wells and of drip irrigation systems. So these 4 adaptation measures are applied in the model. Of course, we could apply others, but we chose to evaluate these 4 because they are relevant in the region. Then we want to look into the future effects of drought, so also into the effects of climate change on drought frequencies. So we created a few scenarios, a scenario where it became wetter. So based on the current projections, current climate projections, they project wettening in that Eastern Africa region. If you look at the current trends in rainfall, we actually see a drying trend. So we also included a drier future. And then we also played around with a hotter future and then created a wetter hotter, drier hotter, and just a hotter future. So a few climate scenarios. Then we calculated the probability of occurrence of droughts to see also how that would affect the crop yields in the future. And in the second phase, we used the aquacrop model of FAO to evaluate the crop yields in this region under these combinations of the adaptation measures I just showed you. So if we just apply rainfed agriculture, we can evaluate what the different climate scenarios how they influence crop yield, but also how that differs under different adaptation measures, under different water management, agricultural water management scenarios. And so that is the first step, and that is the agricultural module in our ADOPT model. Then we wanted to evaluate our behavioral module. So how do people actually behave? And we discussed this with local experts. We did a lot of interviews with stakeholders, with local farmers, and we created a fuzzy cognitive map to try to understand the system that creates drought risk in the region, which elements create drought risk and which elements are actually barriers to adoption of adaptation measures. And that we combined this information with existing theory. The existing theory uses the protection motivation theory that talks about the threat appraisal and the coping appraisal, and both actually define together the adaptation intention of farmers. So this theory was applied in the model to evaluate which farmers would make these decisions about adaptation and when. After we created this initial design of the behavioral module, we wanted to parameterize it better. And we did a large semi-structured household questionnaire among smallholder farmers in the region to evaluate well, their past behavior, but also their potential future behavior. So which factors actually in the past influence their adaptation decisions. What we can see that, for example, the people or the households that have adopted measures before, they actually experienced less droughts. So that is actually a result of adopting new measures. However, we can also see that people that believe in their own capacity have a larger likelihood to have adopted measures. That means that their self-efficacy, their belief in their own capacity is actually a very positive factor in the likelihood to adopt new measures. As such, we evaluated many factors and made sure that our model was able to replicate what we observed in the field. Last, we also wanted to understand their future behavior. How would these farm households behave under future policy context? And we asked them which policy measures they would actually appreciate most, or which one would actually improve their intention to adopt new measures the most. We played around with different setups of extension services, of early warning systems, cash transfers or food transfers ex ante, so before droughts happen, and also the credit scheme, so the reduction of the interest rate for adaptation measures. So we evaluated this. We saw that all four have actually a positive influence on the intention to adopt new measures, but of course in different quantities. Also, we could see that there is a big heterogeneity among these farmers. So some farmers prefer the extension services, other farmers might actually prefer the credit schemes. And so that was something we could quantify as well, and then also implement in the model. So then if we run the model, we can simulate the adaptation measures that are adopted over time by the households. And what we could see is that well, over time, there is an increase in any case in adoption of measures, and that is just the effect of innovation diffusion. People talk in their social network, and people start adopting more and more measures. However, we can speed up this process if we remove some of the barriers that currently exist. For example, if we remove the barrier of knowledge constraint by providing suitable extension services, there would be an increase in the adoption of adaptation measures. Also, if we improve or remove the barrier of financial constraints by allowing for low interest rate credit schemes, then again, we see an increase in the adoption of measures. Of course, this adoption of adaptation measures has an effect on, well, the well-being of the households, and that's something we evaluated as well. So we evaluated the effect of this on, for example, the household food security, on the poverty rates, and on the emergency aid needs of all these households. And here we evaluated 3 scenarios, as you can see in purple, orange, and green. So the orange one is a reactive scenario where there is actually no proactive government actions. There would be just aid after a drought happens for those who need, but no actions are taken. And we have the proactive government scenario where the government would send out early warnings, seasonal early warnings, and where the government would provide, if there is a warning for a drought, with ex-ante cash transfer. And in the purple scenario, this is the combination of the 4 measures that we discussed. So both early warning systems and ex-ante cash transfers, but also on a more strategic level, there would be more extension services, and the interest rate on the credit markets would be reduced. And clearly, this last scenario, this holistic scenario, where four barriers are removed, has the most positive influence on food security levels. It has the biggest reduction in poverty rate and the biggest reduction in emergency aid needs. So this scenario is actually, by removing multiple barriers at once, it creates a nonlinear effect on the drought risk in the region. And so that is something I think we learned from this model, that just removing one barrier will not have a huge influence on the resilience of people, because they will just bump up on the next barrier to adapt. What we also see, for example, very clear in the poverty rate graph, is that it takes a few years before the effect is visible. So if we act now, then only in a few years, in a few decades even, this effect will be visible. And lastly, we could see that if we look into the hotter and drier future, so the worst case scenario, if we talk about droughts, then only this scenario where we apply this holistic approach with the 4 government measures applied, only in that scenario we would see a reduction in aid needs under these most extreme climate scenarios. So this is the only one robust under all different climate scenarios. If we would not combine the 4 measures, then under a hotter and drier climate, we would still see an increase in aid needs, still see an increase in food insecurity, and an increase in poverty rate. So that was what we evaluated with this ad hoc model. And if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them, so please post them in the Q&A. We also published about this. There's 4 papers about this out. So if you're interested in it, feel free to find them. They're all open access. Thank you. I'll give the floor to Anna now. Anna, would you like to share your screen?
I'm okay to keep sharing, and then I'll tell you to. So yeah, thanks, Marthe. So in Marthe's research, she really looked at the individual farmers and their adaptation measures. In another project, which is called Connect for Water Resilience, we are looking at the larger scale. So what is, like, all these measures combined, what is the effect on the scale of a whole large river basin, and in this case even a transboundary river basin, so the Limpopo basin that connects, of course, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Mozambique, and South Africa. And what we're also, so within this project, of course, well, we know in this region there have been lots of droughts, but we're also interested not only in the droughts but also in the floods, because people in the area need to deal with both extremes. So Marthe is focused on drought, but what if there's both happening, and maybe there's even, well, does that increase the impacts, or is there a way to maybe those high precipitation levels or events could be used to alleviate some of the drought? And that is important because, droughts and floods are studied separately, but I think it would be useful to look at them together. And we need to also not only include the physical processes, but very much also the social and political processes. And this Connect for Water Resilience project really looks at all of those different connections between drought and flood, and between local scale and larger scale, between natural processes and social processes, in the end with the aim to improve, hopefully, basin scale drought and flood management and communication. So we've done quite a few things, and I'll quickly run you through just a few things we've done, and no need to look at the details, but we started looking at the climate and hydrology. So looking at when droughts and floods actually occur, especially also focusing on the groundwater levels, because we think that the groundwater can be a really a useful, of course, like it's a buffer for both floods and droughts. So we really wanted to also connect the surface water and groundwater analysis in the region. So we looked at groundwater levels, and then we developed this recharge and groundwater model that could then help us to look at the possible scenarios. Another thing we've done is really go talk to people in community focus groups, but also with policymakers, so in governance interviews, to understand a bit like what Marthe was talking about, like what are barriers for adaptation, and also what can governments do to support communities. So what about like forecast information? What about what is needed for preparation, and what is the role of people making the connection, making the information flow between different skills and different layers between the community and the government. So we looked at also the role of extension officers and NGOs, for example. Then, so this was all still quite small scale. Then on the larger transboundary scale, we organized this interactive workshop where we had stakeholders discuss these, well, the outcomes, of course, of these different parts of the research, but then also looking forward to, so what can we do, what are possible adaptation measures that we could implement, and this is sort of the interactive map that we made with lots of different options being mentioned. But interestingly, I think what we really got out of this is that in different countries, maybe different measures work best, both for the physical context, but also for the cultural and political and socioeconomic context. And what is then also important, of course, is to look at, if you would implement these measures, what would the implications be for people, but also for maybe downstream or later in time. So that's where the model comes in again. We could simulate different future scenarios with these adaptation measures in the model. I'm just showing you one here, but we have like all of these different ones I showed before. We are looking at those now in the model. This is one where we looked at the effect of increasing groundwater abstraction, which is something that in many parts of the basin they're really interested in, to improve irrigation in many of the areas, and also to, of course, provide drinking water for a growing population. And you see that actually if you implement this increase in abstraction, the effects of this are very diverse throughout the catchment. So in some areas you see these red areas, you see a really strong drawdown of the groundwater, whereas in other areas the effect is relatively minor. And then we're of course really interested then to discuss again with the stakeholders what this would mean and how this would affect other communities living in the same area. So that is our next steps, where of course we're finalizing the model scenarios, but then the important thing to still be done within this project is to discuss these scenarios with the stakeholders, and to also bring in, so what does this mean in terms of how this communication or this information flow between the different layers of government, but also between the government and the community, can be improved if we have this information from like the effect of those adaptation scenarios on other communities or downstream, or maybe between floods and droughts. So yeah, that's what we're still hoping to do in the project. We still have a few months to do that. So we're organizing these workshops early next year. Yeah, with that, I would like to thank you for inviting us here and sharing these insights. And I'm really curious to also, well, hear more about what you are doing and connect. And please indeed let us know if you have any questions or comments in the Q&A. I'm happy to address those. Thank you very much.
Very much indeed, both Marthe and Anna, for those very interesting talks. I know we've got a couple of questions in the chat, but if I might just jump in first, I was interested, Anna, to see that in the modelling and in your discussions, management options included changes in crops and changes in land use practice. And this is obviously very close to CEPHaS interests, and that we're wondering about impacts of conservation agriculture, in particular, its adaptation on what happens to water and soil and groundwater. So I was wondering what kinds of evidence or models or assumptions you were bringing to bear on that aspect of the story, how changes in land use might affect what's happening to water in these catchments.
Is that a question to Marthe or to me or to both?
Well, I was thinking to you primarily because I was looking at the comments on land use as a component in in the slides you spoke to.
Thanks. Yeah, the land use was definitely a point that was mentioned a lot in the discussions we had. It was mostly, though, not so much on the crop side, but mostly on forests, so reforestation and deforestation. So in many of actually I think all of the countries, there were sort of programs to do tree planting in the communities. Also agroforestry is promoted often stakeholders were really interested to see the effects of this. Also, we talked about the other side, that especially, and that connects again droughts and floods, that during droughts, one of the coping mechanisms of people is to cut trees and make charcoal. The question really came up, like, what is the effect of that coping mechanism during drought on flooding later on if there is a heavy rainfall in the same area. So we mostly indeed talked about trees and a bit less about crops in this case.
Thank you very much. There are a couple of questions addressed specifically to Marthe in the chat. The first one from Dan. So Dan says multi-year droughts already being seen in some regions.
Sorry.
Could you comment on how the 4 adaptive interventions you investigated in Kenya perform or are likely to perform under this type of scenario? So thinking about multi-year droughts in particular.
Yes, thank you. So how aquacrop works is that it includes daily conditions of precipitation, evapotranspiration, and temperature. So multi-year droughts are actually already present in the model. And so the graph that I showed you with these average yields, they include the average conditions of like 30 years of weather conditions, and multi-year droughts are part of that. If in looking into the hot and dry scenario, there probably are, or there are more multi-year droughts, or at least multiple seasons of crop failure in a row. And then of course, the average yield over this period will decrease. Still, what we saw is that, well, all these measures are actually better than rainfed. I mean, that's not a big surprise, of course. And of course, the combination of having water from a well and drip irrigation system performs best. That's also not a very surprising result, but that's how aquacrop is calibrated. It uses these structures in them to calculate crop yield under daily conditions. And so you can apply any climate scenario. Actually, you can test especially for multi-year droughts and then see how this affects the crop yield. So, I mean, it is included in the model. And of course, what we can see is that in these, if looking into the social side, is that if there is multiple crop failures in a row, then actually there are more barriers to adaptation. Their farmers' risk awareness will be high, but they will not have the financial capacity anymore to do anything. And that's where these governmental measures come into effect. If then there is ex ante aid, so before the drought happens, there is financial aid, then people will be able to adapt, and that will help. So that is, yeah, something present in the model indeed.
And Alan asked Marthe whether what challenges you thought there would be in applying the model to new areas.
So there is, it's an Asian-based model, so it's really local. It needs local data, and so that means it needs AgriCrop to be calibrated to the local maize types, to the local soil types. But of course, this information is present in most areas. And then it needs to have the adaptive behavior of humans parameterized based on the local context. So now we use a general theory, but we parameterize it based on the context. So you need some kind of surveys or information from the study area you're working with to see if people behave the same, because I wouldn't make the assumption that farmers or farm households in Kitui behave exactly the same as farm households somewhere in South Africa. That is something you need to adjust, but the structure of the model can be easily applied to any. It's more like the parameterization, and because it's an Asian-based model, there is a lot of information needed to parameterize, but it's possible.
Right. I wonder if I could just combine two questions as a last question to Anna. So Alan asked how both the modelling but also local farmers deal with the episodic nature of recharge when considering management options. And Richard Owen asked whether you identified any significant transboundary impacts to groundwater and surface water in the Limpopo basin.
Yeah, to start with the first question, thanks both, really interesting topics. Yeah, this is what we're currently working on, and I would hypothesize that we will find this, especially partly with indeed the groundwater abstraction, which they increased the scenario of increases in groundwater abstraction are highest in South Africa. Yeah, most development happening there, which is relatively upstream in the basin, so will have downstream impacts in Mozambique. Other things happening, or like scenarios that we're looking at, for example, more dams in the upstream area, which, for example, in Botswana, they're interested in making a large reservoir, whereas in Zimbabwe, they're more interested in making small sand dams. And we're now looking at the downstream effect of these in both in Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Mozambique. In Mozambique, they're also interested in making quite a large reservoir, but of course they're at the downstream end. But we're also, what we're hoping to do is maybe, or to see is to see if those both the sand dams and the larger reservoirs can also act to recharge the groundwater, which might then sort of compensate for the effects of an increased abstraction. And we're also looking at, of course, at return flows that might actually be beneficial then to mitigate floods downstream. This increased recharge from the reservoirs into the aquifer might hopefully increase or decrease floods downstream. So that's what we're looking at the moment. In terms of the episodic nature of recharge, in this project we're not looking at that, but I know it's an important one to consider. So another project we're involved in is called Down to Earth. It's in the Horn of Africa, and it develops specifically methodology to indeed include this episodic recharge and to simulate that in models, and that can then be coupled with the model that Marthe just presented, this agent-based model, where we then will be able to, for these dryland areas where of course this episodic recharge is super important, be able to both simulate the hydrological processes and the farmer decision making in one combined model. So that's also still on the to-do list.
Thank you very much indeed, both, for interesting talks and for your response to questions, of which there are plenty more in the chat. So if you're able to have a look at those, that would be great. But thank you both again. And we have to move on now. And the first of our talks this morning from within the CEPHaS team is being presented by D. Mudimbu from University of Zimbabwe, on behalf of the wider Working Group 3 Hydrogeology team. And Dee's going to be talking about climate smart agriculture impacts on estimates of groundwater recharge. So thank you very much, Dee.
Morning. Thank you, Mary. Can I share my screen yet? Yes.
Yes, Dee.
Do that. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Morning, thank you for the introduction. And I'm representing the Hydrogeology Working Group, and our topic is climate smart agriculture impacts on groundwater recharge estimates. So everyone's mentioned, we within the group with the statisticians, the geophysicists, agriculturalists, soil scientists. And for us, it's been a learning experience because, particularly if I say us, maybe me, we don't necessarily always work with the soil scientists. So learning a bit more about conservation agriculture has been part of what I've done during this project as well, in terms of, just even the principles of conservation agriculture. So everyone's who's been here with us before knows we are working in the 3 sites in Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And the key part of this, like I'm already saying, was capacity building. So as much as I'm in the hydrogeology group, I'm not a hydrogeologist in terms of by training or the focus of my work. And we have others as well within the group. So within the group itself, we've had quite a lot of learning experiences going on, as well as working with others and learning from others and trying to share what we know with respect to hydrogeology. Our key question for the CEPHaS project, for those who haven't been with us in the previous days, it's what is the impact of climate smart agriculture? And in our case, we're talking about conservation agriculture on soil water dynamics. So what does it do for agricultural resilience? And for us, we are focusing on groundwater recharge. And the limiting factor, of course, like I keep saying, because it's capacity building within CEPHaS, is do we have enough research capacity? And what can we add to this understanding of what's happening with respect to groundwater or the groundwater component under conservation agriculture? What did we know from literature? We also did, as part of this project, a literature review, and we were looking at what is there. And we found there's a lack of systematic evaluation of research studies. So you pick up a paper that compares conservation agriculture and conventional or tilled. There's always a line in there that says that, or depending on which way the treatment or the investigation went, but there's usually in there that greater infiltration, if it is greater infiltration, leads to potential groundwater recharge. However, there isn't always in there a measure of what we mean by groundwater recharge. How much groundwater recharge are we talking about? So a lot of the literature that we found when we did the evaluation of about 34 studies, and it also included reviews by others, was that there was a limited number of research papers that used methods of direct methods of recharge estimation. So we wanted to bring that into this project, show how it's done, help in terms of building capacity on use of these direct methods. We'll talk a little bit more about those, but use of groundwater level fluctuations, environmental traces, stable isotopes, how we can include these to actually have a measurement of groundwater recharge under the different treatment conditions. Just as an example, I won't go into the details of this, but just 2 papers that we came across, one by Daniel in 1999 and O'Leary, and of course differences in terms of the settings that they were in. One where the rainfall was 836 millimeters in Daniel's paper, and another about 450. One in the USA, one in Niger. And in there, those were the 2 papers out of the 34 actually that actually had a measurement of how much was of the precipitation within a year was actually moving into groundwater. And there was a difference in just those 2 papers that we actually found, where one was saying it was higher under conventional tillage, which is the Daniel paper, with about 104 to 208 millimeters of recharge in a year. And yet O'Leary, who was in Niger, less rainfall, annual rainfall, was saying 185 to 186 millimeters per year was due to no-till in terms of more the conservation agriculture kind of practice. So already 2 diverse kind of results. So when we're looking at the question for us in groundwater, we have an example in there where this is a farm in Liempe, and a farm in close to Lusaka in Zambia, one of our project sites. And when you're looking at the top right image in there, that's just the different farming systems. And in there we can see the little clumps in there, the pale dots in there is all the residues ready for the field. And then where it's tilled, there are no residues. And in the middle pictures, we can see that as well. And we're trying to find out, so what is there a possible effect when we talk about conservation agriculture treatment and no-till in terms of timing? At what time do we start to get groundwater recharge? How about the amount of recharge within that season? Does it differ? And what are the pathways? Because we've heard that conservation agriculture, there's different kinds of pathways that are created by the increase in biota. So in our study design, we had an installation of boreholes that went on within Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And in all 3 countries, it was actually in fresh installations. There were no boreholes in there to start with. We put some automatic transducers in those boreholes so that we would be able to measure our water level fluctuations, to use that in calculation of recharge. And then also we were using other methods, chemical methods. We were looking at the groundwater chemistry, looking at residence time traces, isotopic changes, to see if we would be able to come up with an estimation of groundwater recharge using that. And our treatment plots started at different times. In Zambia and Zimbabwe, we have those that started a little earlier on, and end of 2018, Malawi, and another field in Zambia started a bit later on, end of 2019. But we managed to do observations in over at least 3.5 years for some of the longest treatments that we monitored. Setting up of those monitoring boreholes was quite tricky because we were talking about putting up boreholes in plots or fields that were already existing. Some of them were 7 to 10 years old already. So we didn't want to disturb these systems because these systems were being used to monitor other things by the other working groups, such as the soil water content. We didn't want to make too much of an impact in terms of impaction of that soil. So we had to use all sorts of interesting methods that, of course, drillers who we usually work with, we're not used to, putting metal sheets on the field so that we could reduce the impact of compaction. Smaller rigs were used. And in some cases, we actually had to put our boreholes on the edges of the fields and not within the fields. So we drilled shallow boreholes that finished about 5 meters below the rest water level, and slightly deeper ones ending 15 meters below the rest water level, and even deeper ones 30 meters below. And the deeper ones we were going to be using, or we've used already in some of the countries in Zimbabwe, for our pump test. And with just a note on the geology, it's basement complex in all 3 countries. So we're talking about schists and granitic bedrock, and rest water levels were up to about 7 meters or 11 meters below ground level. And the images in there, just images of drilling going on in Zimbabwe, how we were showing we were trying to protect the existing systems, putting covers on the fields. The middle image in there, we've got conventional tilled, an array of boreholes at the edge of the field in Malawi. And then on where it says CA, those are the 5 boreholes. And some of those you can see are quite close to each other, so that we'd be able to get the parameters that we needed when we did the pumping test. The automatic transducers that we used in the boreholes, just some of the images of that, and the logs that we kept as the drilling went on. So some of the results to share, the results that we got. These are three areas that we were monitoring: daily rainfall, change in water level, the middle ones, and cumulative rainfall. So when you just look at that for that groundwater fluctuations method that we talked about in trying to estimate recharge, we'll see that for now we're focusing on the 2 seasons of 2019, 2020, and 2020 to 2021. So in those 2 seasons, Malawi's rainfall, just the top charts, was fairly similar. By the end of the year, it was 788 millimeters compared to 718 in the 2020-21. In Zambia and Zimbabwe, a little bit different. We had differences in the 2019 season where much less rainfall was received, particularly for Zimbabwe, where we only got 380 millimeters of rainfall. And this had an impact when you look at the middle charts there, where we're showing those changes in water level. These have just been put such that we're starting at 0, but of course we didn't start at 0, we started at whatever the wastewater level was, but this is for comparative purposes. And the green in there is your CA water levels, conservation agriculture, and your red is your tilled. And you can see that within Zimbabwe in that 2019-2020 year, there was no recharge because we found that there's a threshold that you're required to reach in terms of cumulative rainfall for us to be able to get recharge. When we look a bit further at those charts, however, you'll see that the peaks are also different. Malawi had much shallower peaks in response to the rainfall, where only a meter or so of water level rise. In Zambia and Zimbabwe, quite different as well, up to a 3 or 4 meters rise in water level during the peak season, or when we'd had the cumulative, most of the rainfall coming in. And in Zambia in particular, you can see a stronger initial response to rainfall. And in there, you can see a difference between the CA and the CT plots, where there is a much sharper increase, but also higher within the CA. In the Zim setting, you see a little bit of that as well within the 2021 season. When we look at just going back in there, the differences in that in Malawi, we're actually saying the system could be a little bit different because there's a longer time before the system in terms of the groundwater system responds to recharge. So there's been suggestions that they perhaps a bit of a confined or semi-confined aquifer in there, which is a bit different from the Zim and Zimbabwe setting. When you look at the results that we got from the stable isotope data, so we collected some rainfall samples using the sample top right picture, these rainfall collectors that were developed with guidance from our UK partners. And those stable isotopes were measuring oxygen and hydrogen, oxygen 18 and deuterium in our water. And you can see in Malawi and Zambia, we were saying we managed to collect those samples of rainfall monthly, and as well as samples of the groundwater monthly. In Zimbabwe, we collected a bit more information in terms of every rainfall event we tried to within the 2020-21 season, and even the one before. And the charts in there, we'll look at them a little bit more closely later, but we'll go on the next slide. But the triangles are showing precipitation, and the red circles is the stable isotopes measured in tilled, the boreholes under the tilled treatments, and green, the boreholes under the conservation agriculture treatment. And the lines in there are just the global meteoric water level and the local one. And we're just comparing in there, what would we expect? We'd expect that there's a more linear kind of plotting of the isotopes if they're similar to the meteoric water levels. And if we go to just zooming in on those in terms of what we got as the results, the red tilled, the green is conservation agriculture. When we look at Malawi and Zimbabwe, there's more a clustering in terms of what ratios when we're looking at those ratios of O18 to deuterium. And that's more, there's a similar composition in isotopes. So there isn't much difference that we're seeing between the two treatments. When we look at Zambia, however, in terms of the water that we're collecting under the two treatments, there's definitely two distinct groups that we're looking at in there. And within those two groups, you're finding that under CA, there's a greater enrichment in terms of isotopes, and CT is a little bit different. And these groupings are indicative of possibly different recharge sources. And we've talked about within the group how there's lighter isotopes and heavier rainfall, or heavy rainfall events. And what we're seeing perhaps is a result of how CA, perhaps there's more recharge occurring throughout the rainfall, different rainfall events, as compared to CT, where only the heavy rainfall events could result in recharge. But that's only in the Zambia plots that we're looking at that. What did we find in terms of the estimations of groundwater? This we're going to show you share just the results from Zimbabwe, because we need those pumping tests that we mentioned earlier on to be able to get information on the parameters of the aquifer to calculate recharge. And we've managed to do the pumping test successfully in Zimbabwe, but we still needed to complete Malawi. We had a few challenges, and Zambia as well, which is ongoing, I think, within this week. So we're finding under CA and tilts, there isn't as much difference in there. With respect to 2018, 2019, 27 to 28 millimeters of rainfall in CA, and tilt 26 to 27 millimeters of rainfall, which is also what we were looking at within those charts in terms of recharge. In 2019, 2020, no recharge was experienced, but in 2020, 2021, definitely significantly more, but that's the season that had a lot more rainfall. And for us, that's just looking at those two, CA and tilt, in the interest of time. Woodlot and Newsom are treatment plots that were a little bit different, but I won't go into it now, perhaps in the discussions. But definitely a greater response. What's the controlling factor that we're finding there was more precipitation. So when we summarize, what we have is precipitation is the dominant factor in recharge, not necessarily the treatments that we're looking at for the Zim case in particular, but even when you look at Zambia and the other countries, there's a greater response. If you get more rainfall that year, then there's greater recharge. The onset of recharge is linked to a threshold amount, as we saw in those charts. We needed a threshold of at least 350 to 400 millimeters of rainfall to fall within Zim and Zambia setting for us to get recharge. The scale of the treatments is an important factor that we're also starting to see. In Zambia, there's much larger treatment plots that we're talking about as compared to Zim, where we're talking about 10 by 10 meter treatment plots. So for us, from a groundwater recharge calculation perspective, the scale starts to make a difference. How big are the plots that we're talking about? The influence in the number of CA principles adopted could also be something else, where there's intercropping in Zambia as compared to none within the Zim setting. And of course, others have talked about it, how much in terms of those residues have been put on there. So CA for us, we had all sorts of assumptions at the beginning, but it does not result in a reduction in groundwater recharge. We're not seeing that with the results that we're getting. So as much as people are saying perhaps there's greater conservation of soil moisture, it did not result in an observable groundwater recharge difference, which is a good thing. The next steps, we were working with the other working groups, where we're talking about the soil physics, the higher part of the soil profile, looking at what is happening with respect to soil moisture in there. And can we see a relationship between what happens in that top part and then when we actually start to get, or the onset of recharge, or the amount of recharge? And that's things that we still need to do going forward as we bring in all our data sets together. Shallow geophysics, the same electrical resistivity. Are we able to use that to have an indication of how much of the groundwater precipitation will move to groundwater? Statistical analysis is something that we've also started, where we're looking at a model here with the help of our statisticians. When we looked at the Malawi water levels, we were seeing that they looked quite parallel in terms of how they present in that top graph. So when we used the general additive mixed model with the help of the statistician group, we found that there's actually an offset between the two treatments. It's not necessarily that there's just a parallel relationship, which you would have thought in terms of just the visual look of those graphs, but there is a little bit more that we can look into. There are a bit more differences with respect to how the response in groundwater recharge in those two. So these are things that we intend to continue to do as we finish off or analyze a lot more of the data that we collected. And for us, in terms of just sharing, because that was our key question, that's one of the things that we wanted to share. And from that, I acknowledge the funders of the project, fellow colleagues within WG3, and that's what we're sharing for this morning on groundwater recharge. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dee, for that very interesting, comprehensive talk about work across the sites in CEPHaS. I don't think we've got any questions that have come through yet. What I suggest is that if we go straight on to the next presentation and see what questions come through. So if you have questions for Dee, please do continue to put them in the Q&A. Because our next presentation is to be given by Namaona from Namaona, and he has to go off to join a field team very shortly after completing his presentation. So we want to give him plenty of time to give his presentation, then to go and catch up with his colleagues in the field. So if we hand over to Willie now, and then questions to Dee, as well as Willie can be brought back when he has finished. So Willie Namaona is part of the Malawi CEPHaS team at Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. He's an irrigation engineer with interests in surface hydrology, soil and water conservation, and open channel hydraulics. And he has been taking the lead with hydrogeology work in Malawi. Willie's talk is primarily about capacity strengthening, capacity building in multidisciplinary methods. So looking at some of what's been necessary to build capacity to deliver some of the results that Dee was presenting just now. So Willie, please take over and give us your presentation, which we're very much looking forward to.
Okay, can I share my screen?
Yes, please, if you'd like to.
Okay. Okay, good morning to everyone. I would like to first thank the organizers of the conference for giving us the opportunity, especially our working group, to present on capacity building in multidisciplinary scientific methods for improved understanding of the impact of conservation agriculture on groundwater resource in Africa. So my presentation focuses on capacity building. It does not cover anything to do with the science on the groundwater recharge as regards to conservation agriculture. So as a background, the sub-Saharan countries, most of them rely on groundwater resource. That's for both agricultural use and also domestic purposes. And therefore, making systems of groundwater resource in these areas is very important, or is paramount for food security, as well as safe water, access to safe and clean water. However, that is threatened by the ever-changing climate, which has also been noticed in the past, or has been evidenced in the past. For example, in 2015-2016 farming season, it was reported that 27 million people in SADC region were left food insecure, and that was due to poor harvest. So as a result, governments are promoting CA, among other climate smart agronomic system, as a way of coping up with the food insecurity issues in the region. So CA has been promoted as a tool to obtain a reliable crop yield. And this is being promoted based on three principles. That is on the minimum soil disturbance or no tillage, crop or surface residual retention, and also crop diversification or crop rotation. So as the first presenter Dee also mentioned, the key question is, what is the impact of CA on soil water dynamics, agricultural resilience, and the groundwater recharge? So in our group, our interest is on the groundwater recharge, but we had that as a limiting factor, which is the research capacity in the relevant physical sciences. That is to say, soil physics, shallow geophysics, and also hydrogeology. So to better have a clear understanding on the impact, the project considered some processes, that is the available water for crop growth, profile water recharge, and also groundwater recharge. So the project was framed in a way that it included the scientists from multidisciplinary or from different areas of specialty, so that together as a system we can understand the soil water properties, that is through field and lab measurements, and also dynamics and transport between surface and deeper profile, recharge processes, and thereby also understanding the statistical and the process modeling through prediction and upscaling, not forgetting the socio-economic assessment, because CA is being practiced by farmers, and it's for their livelihood and also socio-economic status. So it's a group of people, scientists from different fields, from different capacities coming together to understand this. And the project was designed in 3 countries, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, whereby in those 3 countries, equipment has been installed in the field. Also, some lab equipment has been installed in the lab for some analysis. So for the field equipment in all the 3 countries, they have been installed soil moisture monitoring probes, monitoring boreholes to monitor groundwater levels, and also loggers or automated pressure transducers were installed in those boreholes, and also electrical resistivity tomography equipment, so that we monitor both the soil moisture, movement of water from the profile to the deeper levels, and also the groundwater recharge. So if you see from those pictures, shows installation of the boreholes, also some probes to monitor moisture over time, and also the pressure transducer that is used to log groundwater level fluctuation. And in terms of the capacity, the project also was designed in a way that it provided more training workshops. Those has been physical and virtual maybe mostly because of the pandemic, but we had some physical training, network meetings, practical in-field, and also laboratory exchanges. And most of the training has been on-job training. University students have been also involved, and also project partners have been involved in most of the training. And you can see from those pictures, the one on top, it was during the network meeting in the Zambia, whereby we had a training on the groundwater sampling. And also the one on the middle is setting up equipment for pump testing. I think that is in Zimbabwe, and on the shallow geophysics monitoring, that is the one that is on the down. Looking at the key issues and lessons that have been achieved in the project, there's a strong or genuine partnership that has been also enhanced. Through the training, we have captured and learned, and also we have experiences that are in useful format that can be used elsewhere or in other research that can be involved. The value of on-the-job training also has not been overlooked, because this is what has been taking place. Most of the training has been conducted on site, on job, so that we have a better understanding, the hands-on experiences in most of the things that have been conducted in the project. Also, the training of the trainers, that has also been demonstrated, and it builds a legacy. Gender balanced, that has been demonstrated, and it has to be proactive, especially in mentoring the stakeholders. The need for opportunities for the early career researchers has also been demonstrated in this, we have seen that early career researchers have been given opportunity to lead working group or to be in the leadership position of different working groups, and that has been demonstrated in the project. There are also issues to do with the cross-pollination and also innovation collaboration. Through the project, there have been enhanced capacity research, which has included as a work stream. Since the project also is involving different scientists from different fields, it has resulted in cross-pollination of ideas between or among or within scientists of different expertise, and also people from different countries that has been enhanced, which has generated innovative in methods and solutions that can be better inform the policies. The international network also has been of very important in this project and has been used. And not only in this project, it will also be used in the future collaboration of national and regional significance. So in terms of capacity, those are some of the things that has been demonstrated throughout the project. And in my last 2 slides, I will also just show on how also some interns have benefited from this project. We have involved some interns who have been there from the start of the project up until now. Actually, I have a case of Tumbiko, which has been there from the time we started drilling the bores up until now. Actually, I was supposed to present this by himself, but as I'm talking, he's also out in the field also on other activities of the same project of CEPHaS. So Tumbiko and other interns, they have been there. You can see that the first photo is there doing the drilling of the boreholes in Malawi, and also getting some training together with some researchers and also some interns getting the training on how to do borehole logging, and also being involved on preparing the material for construction of the boreholes with the trainer Benji, Tumbiko, and also some colleagues. So not only during the construction and installation of the equipment, but he is also involved in collection of data, downloading of water level data from the pressure transducers through WinSitu program. He is also involved in collecting some physical parameters during groundwater sampling, and also collecting the water samples so that they should be sent for further analysis. And also other members from other working groups. We have our colleague Innocent is from the shallow geophysics group, but has been involved in all the activities that have been conducted for hydrogeology. And also us members of this group also have been involved in other activities conducted by other groups, thereby also still more enhancing our capacity with regards to understanding what will be the impact of CA on the groundwater recharge. Let me end there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Willie, for an extremely interesting account of the work in Working Group 3 from the capacity building perspective. So there's a question from Dan, and Dan asks, and he addresses this to both Dee and Willie, but Willie, I know you have to disappear shortly, so I would just ask you first. Dan asks, how do you think the groundwater observatories that CEPHaS have developed could be used to build local capacity in the future? And maybe Dee, if you want to add your thoughts on that after Willie has spoken.
Okay, thank you, Marie. On our part, this is very important because now we have learned the whole process from installation up to data collection, and even putting the data into the appropriate format, data analysis, and also interpretation of the data. So which means if we also can have, not only this one, if you have an idea to do this similar in other areas, we should be able to do it by ourselves without the need for maybe some expert to come and assist us to do the installation. And also on the same, it means we still have the capacity, if we have some equipment that locally we cannot find. Now we have the partnership with some colleagues from BGS, from UK, which we can still liaise and maybe get some of the stuff that we want. So equipment, even knowledge, if we still need something, we still can have, but now we should say we are equipped that we can do such installation and also analysis elsewhere. Thank you.
Did you want to add anything on that capacity point that Dan asked about?
Sure. At the University of Zimbabwe, it will also be a similar kind of thing where we now have more equipment to be able to allow students, for example, to conduct certain research into groundwater into groundwater recharge. And when we're looking at the settings that we've got as it is, just Dombo shower and what we're able to do in there in terms of differences in the treatments, just teaching things like pumping test, how it actually works, what do you do, this data that we've collected and going into continuing with data collection is definitely a wealth of information that can be utilized for other studies. We're only scratching the tip of what we could do with this at the present moment within CEPHaS, but definitely going forward, there's more that we could do. And equipment, definitely the same as what Woody has indicated already. But for me, it's more the practical side. For us within hydrogeology, there's quite a lot that you get to do where it's theory. When you're actually practically doing it, there's a lot of things that you change on the go because of the setting, because of what's happening, for you to be able to get some information that's usable. And that, for me, will bring a wealth of knowledge. There's already an MSc program that's continuing within civil engineering, where they work with, or they're doing water resources management. And for us, that's the initial point where a lot of this equipment is going to be placed for use by the students.
Thank you very much, both answers to that. So I think we just have one more question on the two previous presentations, and this is from Hakunawadi Swarai. And his question particularly is to Dee, and I think it's something that some of us from outside Working Group 3 would like to have clarified. Can you explain what the isotope enrichment plots are showing? Can you give us a sort of non-hydrogeologist's explanation of what those measurements help us to understand about recharge processes? Sorry, Dee, you're muted.
Yep, I'm going to try, and then Bencha, I think from our group, perhaps will add on and help me out there. But when we're talking about the different isotopes of oxygen and deuterium, we're saying if we're measuring those within precipitation, and we measure the same isotopes in the groundwater, we're able to start seeing the impact of, okay, is this water that's ending up within our groundwater storage coming from the precipitation? Like we were saying already, we were saying, okay, the dominant factor here is precipitation. And when we look at isotopes within precipitation, there's certain known ratios when we look at that O18 and deuterium, and those known ratios is what we're comparing the results that we're finding within our groundwater against. So it starts to give us some information on the sources of water that moves into the groundwater storage. Is it related to the precipitation, or is it from other sources? And we are able to look at that and have a say as to, okay, what happens when it's a lighter rainfall episode? What do we expect in terms of that isotope ratio? What about when it's a heavier rainfall kind of event? What do we know about those that isotope ratio? So already it's telling us, like I was saying, perhaps we're able to see a difference when we look at the chemistry of that water to say, okay, this water here is more related to, pretty much more of the rainfall events that have come into this session, or there isn't as as much relationship with the precipitation. It's moving off. There's some other sources of groundwater that are coming in, not necessarily related to that rainfall that we're collecting in that setting. Bencha, I hope I haven't completely said the wrong thing, but please help me out here. Thanks.
Not at all, Dee. You captured that perfectly well. So yes, I don't think I need anything to add to that. That's a perfect answer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dee, for that response, and both you and Willie for the questions you took. And thank you, Willie, for your talk. I know you're off shortly to join other colleagues from Luana on the Grand CEPHaS Soil Physics Survey, which is taking place at the moment, one of the exciting outcomes of the project. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and all the best for the fieldwork. Our next talk before the break is from Kirsten Duda at the Leeds School of Tropical Medicine, where she works with the Capacity Research Unit there. And the Capacity Research Unit I said Leeds, didn't I? I apologise. Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. The capacity unit at Liverpool has been leading the work on capacity research within CEPHaS, trying to make capacity strengthening something we do consciously, rather than just hoping that lots of busy work by osmosis will somehow improve capacity. So Kirsten has been working with colleagues including Lydia Chavula, Mianda Mumbe, and others to develop the capacity program. And she's going to tell us now something about institutional capacity strengthening within CEPHaS and a mixed methods approach to studying what's been going on. So Kirsten, thank you. I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Kirsten Duda. Alessia, if it's possible to go to the next slide to start the presentation, that'd be great. Okay, perfect, great. Thank you so much. So my name is Kirsten Duda, and I work at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And I'll be giving you a brief presentation this morning on institutional capacity strengthening within the CEPHaS project. Next slide, please. So this presentation is based on work that's been conducted to date within Working Group 5. And I won't be presenting on the bulk of the material, but instead I'll be focusing, go back to the next slide. Great. So I'll be presenting on our preliminary findings to date, highlighting key components that have come up through the preliminary interviews, as these mirror the survey data at this point in time. And I'll be focusing on the benefits that have come up through the capacity strengthening activities of the CEPHaS project. Next slide, please. So the methodology for this work has involved two key components. One is a survey. So far we have 40 respondents to that survey. And the survey questions were utilized to evaluate both individual and institutional benefits, specifically as they pertain to the trainings provided through CEPHaS, the resources provided, and the overall CEPHaS experience. In addition to this survey, we also conducted semi-structured interviews that were designed to further allow us to explore the different effects and benefits of the CEPHaS project, both at that individual and institutional level, particularly as they pertain to these three topic areas. Next slide, please. So the trainings specifically, one of the areas that came up is that the skill sets that were provided through the CEPHaS trainings were tailored to the needs of their roles within the participant roles within the CEPHaS project. The trainings of particular value that really came up time and time again are the R training experiences, particularly as they relate to data analysis and data management. And participants felt that this supported their ability to trace and troubleshoot errors. And the equipment training that they received allowed them to understand how to not only use that equipment, but also to troubleshoot equipment problems. And lastly, one of the other key areas that's come up so far are the trainings around financial processes that were able to support the different institutes in doing more of the infrastructure and institutional side of things in the finance sector. In addition to actually providing the skill sets that were needed by the participants within their role in the CEPHaS project, they also provided transferable skills, particularly again, as these applied to data analysis via the R software. And then the way that the trainings, or the types of the trainings that were available to the CEPHaS participants across a broad range of conservation and agriculture areas provided interdisciplinary training that was perceived by the individual participants as being very beneficial to them, both within the project and in regards to their future activities. And in addition to that, having that interdisciplinary support network where they had access to conversations and communication with other members of the team who worked in areas beyond their specialty was something that was of great value to the individual participants. Next slide, please. So the quality of the trainings, the benefits of these trainings, the majority of the participants said that the trainings that they received couldn't have been accessed elsewhere. And in the few instances where individuals thought that maybe there might be a chance, they didn't think that that was something that would be very easy to obtain. Additionally, one of the other benefits of the quality of these trainings was that the trainings covered the basic science within each of these topic areas, so that the working group members who were each were on the same page as the other working group members, despite their background or whether or not they were based at different institutes. So everyone was allowed to have that sort of foundational knowledge and experience. Additionally, one of the things that was highlighted time and time again by participants was the quality of the training materials. So the training materials were noted as being very understandable and easy to access, and they were something that was valued because the participants felt they could continue to use these in the future and that they were a good, solid resource. The trainers additionally were cited as being supportive and accessible both throughout that training process and to support project activities post-training. So these were some of the key things that were pointed out in regards to the quality of training. Next slide, please. In regards to the training, one of the areas that we wanted to understand more about was whether or not that knowledge that was obtained by the participants was then transferred to any other students or colleagues. And the area that came up in relation to transfer of knowledge was largely around data management, data analysis, and data presentation, specifically graph and report creation using the R software. So the other interesting thing about this transfer of knowledge was that the students who were supported and were given this additional knowledge by the CEPHaS project staff, they were not just within the CEPHaS project, but they were also in some instances external to the CEPHaS project. And they weren't just within a single institute. So it wasn't just a matter of CEPHaS project staff, but then transferring this knowledge to other students within their personal institute, but also across institutes within the countries in which they worked and across institutes in different countries. So you had that transfer of knowledge in a variety of different means. Next slide, please. So in addition to the trainings, one of the areas that we wanted to explore further was around the resources that were provided through the CEPHaS project. And in regards to the individuals, they felt that the resources that were provided were, again, understandable and easily accessible through those training materials, but also in their immediate work, having access to new scripts were a resource that was highly valued as it allowed them to support their current work. Another resource that allowed participants to really engage in their work and within the CEPHaS project were the laptops that were provided, as it meant that then the participants didn't need to go and find a PC elsewhere if they didn't already have a laptop, and they had that reliable piece of technology to support their ongoing project work. And then lastly, the future application of agricultural equipment that was provided, the training materials and the open source software for projects was something that was seen as potentially being utilized outside of the CEPHaS project and for future research applications. Next slide, please. So the institutional benefits of the resources that were highlighted by the participants were largely these enhanced laboratory facilities. So the very fact that there was this new equipment that was replacing outdated equipment was seen as something that would support coursework within the institute and individual projects for students, and would provide new opportunities to those students. And in addition to actually being able to support the students within their research and their work, these enhanced laboratory facilities with these new resources and new equipment was seen as something that improved the standing and the representation of that institute. And so it could potentially allow for future collaborations because the institute was seen as a partner of value that had the resources to support this type of work, and could potentially attract students because the students would then know that the institute had the facilities to support this type of work as well. In some instances, these resources were continuing to be used or starting to be used within a teaching context, but across the board, there was an intention to use and teach using these resources on institutional courses in the future, if the opportunity were to arise. And in addition to this, the financial processes that were supported through template provision and streamlining these interinstitutional processes between the different partner institutes was something that was seen as a potential institutional value moving forward, as the different financial staff would then have the ability to facilitate those relationships in the future. Next slide, please. So the overall CEPHaS experience was something that we wanted to understand in more depth. And the aspect of the CEPHaS experience that was noted across the board was this expanded network across institutes and across countries. And participants felt that they had the communication and they had the support of other individuals within that expanded network to troubleshoot problems when they were applying these new skills, whether it was in relation to the CEPHaS project or in relation to any work outside of the CEPHaS project. So they felt that comfortable communication and network was available to them. And they felt that this wasn't just something that would exist within the context of the CEPHaS project, but was something that they could rely on for future collaborations and potentially future individual opportunities. So if something came up, they felt like they had that connection where there would be that support if they needed it. Another point of their experience that was highlighted time and time again was this scientific interdisciplinary exchange and exposure. So the experience was described as interdisciplinary in the extent of having multiple experts within the field of conservation agriculture who could then share their specialist expertise, and then individuals who were involved could gain from that experience. They could gain that broader understanding within the field. in addition to that scientific component, though, there was also a cultural exchange. So there was learning around different cultural expectations from all partners, and differences in institutional processes that needed to be understood in order to facilitate the scientific work. The equipment functionality was something that was also highlighted as something that expanded individuals' mindsets around how the application of this equipment and the scientific activities in this field based on climatic conditions, and in some instances led to new equipment modifications to account for this. And last but not least, one of the things that was highlighted as a key component of the CEPHaS experience for the individual was the leadership style of management. So the fact that the leadership style was inclusive and encouraged the exchange of ideas that weren't restricted by hierarchy was something that was highly valued. So individuals felt that they could be a part of the decision-making processes around the CEPHaS project from the very beginning of the project itself. Next slide, please. In regards to institutional benefits of the overall experience, there were a number of participants who didn't feel that they could speak to this necessarily, but some of the perceived potential institutional benefits was again focused on the larger network across the various institutes and also beyond the CEPHaS network. And this interinstitutional knowledge exchange that allowed for the support of international collaborations was something that they felt their institutions potentially gained from. So if they had not had this international level consortia, then perhaps their institutes wouldn't have known how to proceed in this context in the future. But now, because they had the CEPHaS experience and they had this knowledge of these different interactions, there would be a benefit to the Institute in the long run for having this communication and understanding around processes. Next slide, please. So our initial recommendations, again, are based on preliminary data, but the first one I wanted to focus on was the sustainability and things that can be considered in the short term before the end of the CEPHaS project. So 3 points that have just come to light are the long-term access to these electronic resources, these training manuals, the different templates for all partners and partner institutes beyond the life of the CEPHaS project. Having that continuity of access was something that wasn't always something that the different participants were aware of, and ensuring that there is a central hub that is going to continue to exist past the end of the CEPHaS project, where those materials and those resources are readily accessible, is something that's worth consideration. Additionally, ensuring that all institutes and departments have specific staff who are assigned to equipment maintenance at each institute are fully trained before the end of the project. So if equipment is transferred to anyone else within different departments at the end of the project, ensuring that that transfer equipment is in the hands of individuals who have all been trained and are fully aware of equipment maintenance. And then lastly, ensuring agreements are in place for equipment access, where equipment isn't necessarily physically located at an institute that has been using that equipment. So ensuring there's that agreement in place so that that institute continue to use that equipment in the future. Next slide, please. So our initial recommendations for future projects, again, this is based on preliminary data. One of the things that came up was around the training timing and ensuring that the trainings that are that occur in proximity to when that training will be utilized, so that there's real-time data that can be used in conjunction with the trainings. Ensuring that all partner institute infrastructure and processes are uniform or streamlined prior to the initiation of the actual scientific project activities. So for example, finances or processing requests salary time allocation, and considerations around permanent or temporary staff at each of the institutes, that those types of infrastructure and processes are considered, again, prior to those scientific activities beginning. And then lastly, considering the difference between how the grant project processes work and how the institutional processes work. So things can go well according to one system, but it's in the best interest of a project to always consider how those grant processes could potentially marry with those institutional processes to ensure that things are happening in a streamlined way. So that's the end of this presentation. Thank you all for listening today. If there's anyone that I haven't interviewed yet who would like to be interviewed, if you want to get in touch with me, I've left my email address here so that hopefully we'll get even more information before the end of project. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kirsten, for a very interesting overview of capacity strengthening in CEPHaS. I'm not sure if we've got any questions as yet. I can't see them. Right, one from Keith Goulding. Oh, it's not a question. Yeah, so Keith has been enormously helpful to the project, chairing our external advisory board. And we are very grateful to the help that the board has given us under Keith's direction. And Keith was just saying he's pleased with the outcome, so that's good. Thank you, Keith. Kirsten, I wonder what you think. I mean, you gave us a bit of feedback there on how things might be done differently in future. Were there any other particular messages on project management or implementation that you think would be high priorities for thinking about in future bids that we either put together as a group or as separate institutions and in other consortia?
Again, so this is based on the preliminary data, and I'll perhaps speak more generally at this point and go in more detail in our report. But I think this idea of considering beyond the scientific aspects in relation to how the institute as a whole can have these capacity strengthening activities embedded for a long-term vision. I think a lot of activities that have occurred are in relation to sort of this individual capacity strengthening that can then feed into institutional capacity strengthening, but they're things that are potentially more of a long-term process. So potentially trying to think about how some of those larger institutional goals can be achieved from the get-go. Considering initially, again, around before the scientific activities are initiated, considering how the different institutional processes occur and feed into each other and feed into that grant process, I think are things that are worth thinking about and considering, just so that once you start those scientific activities, that you're not then dealing with delays around funding differences between different salary schemes within different institutes, or that the different financial processes are in place so that there aren't any delays or any confusion about what's needed after the project's already started. I think that those are some of the main things. Are there any particular areas that you were interested in?
No, I was thinking more generally, so that was helpful. Thank you.
I do think that one of the other things that was quite good about the management, though, that did come up was that, again, that inclusivity that occurred. And I think at an international consortia, I think is particularly within these grant contexts, having that communication and that inclusivity that didn't necessarily feed into a hierarchy. It meant that people felt that they could contribute to that decision making. And that was actually something that was cited as unique about the project. And the length of the project itself provided the opportunity for those relationships to be built and sort of solidified over time.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. Thank you, Kirsten. I don't think we've got any other questions just yet, but maybe things will come up in the chat.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. We are going to move on now to the second half of our morning, morning from us here in the UK. We are going to have 3 more talks before the conference comes to an end. So I'm going to pass the reins to Marie to introduce our next speaker. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you very much, Lesia. So our first speaker after the break is Russell
Swift.
Russell Swift. I do beg your pardon, Russell. I nearly called you another Russell that we know at BGS. Russell is presenting on behalf of a cast of thousands from Working Group 2 across all sites, as well as UK partners. And Working Group 2 is the Shallow Geophysics Working Group, and Russell will be talking about imaging geolectrical responses of agricultural soils to rainfall events. This is a particularly exciting part of CEPHaS, I think, linking groundwater to the surface. So I'm very much looking forward to Russell's presentation. Thank you, Russell.
Thanks very much, Murray. I've got a message saying that, oh yeah, there we go. Oh, it's not, there we go, brilliant. Hi, as Murray introduced me, I'm Russell Swift. I'm an applied geophysicist for the British Geological Survey working on the CEPHaS project. And I'm here today to talk about electrical resistivity tomography and how we're using that to image the hydrodynamics in the soils under the different agricultural plots in the CEPHaS project. So first of all, I'd like to start this off by just bringing everyone up to speed on what electrical resistivity tomography is. And then I would like to have a bit of a talk about what we've actually done in terms of equipment that we've installed in the CEPHaS observatories. I'd like to talk about what ERT can do in addition to what the other working groups are actually the data that the other working groups are collecting. And then I'd like to run through some of the results that we've collected using ERT. So ERT is a geophysical method where we inject a current into the ground. So you can see here in this picture, A and B here are 2 metal electrodes that have been inserted into the ground, and they're having a current being passed through using the ground to finish the circuit. You can see the arrows here. The current is passing between A and B. And at the same time that we're passing a current and generating this big electrical field running through the subsurface, we measure the voltage at different points to get a resistance reading. Now, as the electricity moves through the ground, it's influenced both by the ground material itself. So say, for example, here you can see in the bottom image, these are loads of clay minerals, which tend to be quite conductive. And up the top here, in the bottom, you can see the blue current passing through the mineral through grains. But in the top image where it's sand, they're not as very conductive, so you aren't getting that flow. But you also get it passing through the pore fluid waters. So it's a combination of the soil or rock material and the fluid that's held in its porosity. And what we do for ERT is we collect lots and lots of measurements. So you can see here, this is the ground surface going across the top, and this is a vertical cross section, lots of electrodes. We've got an instrument here, an ERT instrument, and we're making lots and lots of measurements with these 4 red electrodes that are moving along. And these points are kind of showing around about where we're making the center point of where we're making a measurement. And we collect lots of those. We have something called apparent resistivities, and we can use these data that we've collected, these many points, to start thinking about what that means about the electrical resistivity of the ground. So we put it into a piece of processing software, and that generates a model of the electrical resistivity of the ground. So this is real data from Zambia, one of our observatories. The black dots across the top represent the positions of electrodes. Your color bar here that you're looking at is this rainbow color scheme for this top image, with the warms being higher resistivity and the cools being lower resistivity. You're seeing quite a lot of lateral heterogeneities in there, with probably more cohesive regolith as these lumps, whereas the cooler colors in between are potentially more weathered material. They're possibly getting the water table influencing the lower resistivity towards the lower part of the image. And then across here, you can see this top layer that I'm just kind of pointing out the boundary there, which is probably the soil that the crops are growing in. Now, at this point, it's only we've only taken one measurement of lots of data points, so it's hard to disentangle that what I was saying about it, the electrical resistivity response being a combination of the soil and the moisture. So at this point, we don't know completely what's causing what, but if you make more than one measurement, you can subtract one from the other and look at the differences. And the differences in our case is for the CEPHaS project are almost always caused by water changes. So we have across here, this is a change image. So what I've done is the top image here is another resistivity image for a different date, and we've subtracted one from the other, and you can see the change, with the blues being a reduction in resistivity and the reds being an increase. You can see the change across the top there after the rainfalls occurred. So we have a low cost, low power ERT instrument that's been developed by BGS that we've managed to install at our sites in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. That basically it sits between these arrays of electrodes you can see on the right-hand side of the schematic, and thus installing them here in Zimbabwe. You've got the prime instrument sitting here, which is in this box, which is connected to a router and sends us data automatically. And we've installed this at 3 sites. We've installed in Zambia, which is the data that you just saw the vertical cross section of. We've installed 2 big long 2D lines, well, 1D if you think of kind of about the space of the line, but we think about the image that it makes a 2D cross section. The 2D line buried at depth just below the plough depth. In Zimbabwe, we've gone for a slightly different technique. So you can see F.Nguyen here is installing some electrodes on the ground surface, and you can see lots of lines here, so ERT lines stretched out there. And we've covered the two plots, the conventional and the conservation plots here. We've covered them here on one of the repetitions there, and again on another repetition here. And what that does, when you put all of these lines so close together in parallel, is you're able to actually image volumes rather than just slices. So here you can see some example data from Zimbabwe where we've imaged a volume underneath these underneath the plots that I was showing before. In Malawi, we've gone for a different technique again. So we've gone for a clustered borehole technique where we've installed again on a conservation plot, a conventional plot and a conservation plot, T1 and T3 across the 4 different reps. And we've installed 4 boreholes in the center with 1 meter spacing in between the boreholes, with each on the point of a square. And the boreholes go to just over 3 meters depth. There's 8 electrodes in each borehole. And you can see Ethel and Ivy here installing some in Malawi, the cables that go into these holes that you can see, and they're backfilling with slurry. And that will image with high resolution and volume within the borehole cluster, like a cuboidal volume, as you can see here. So here's the resistivity image from the center of that cuboidal volume. We do actually collect data in the hole in the middle. We've just cut it for viewing purposes. And you can see some change images after some rainfall there as some wetting has occurred. So what do the data show us? So this is kind of a little bit of an overview plot of some of the different data streams that we're getting from working group 1 and from our working group. So you can see rainfall across the top here. If I kind of particularly draw focus to this kind of right-hand side of all the plots, you can see this amount of rainfall that we've got in a wet season. The second plot down is the soil moisture plots, soil water content plots for different depths. So you can see the color-coded depths from 10 to 100 centimeters. You can see that increase as you'd expect from rainfall. It's not a lot on the third plot because of there were some data outages, unfortunately, which is showing matrix potential. But if we look down here, what I've done is I've isolated some cells from the resistivity image for the same dates. You can see that we're getting a big reduction in resistivity, where you're getting a big increase in soil water content, which is what you'd expect and what we'd hope for, which is great news. And at this point, you might think, well, why are we collecting ERT if it's just telling us the same thing as soil moisture probes? Why would we bother? Well, the reason for that is the spatial resolution that you get from ERT is greatly increased when compared to point sensor data. So this is back to the Zambia data. We've got our ERT line stretching across here. You can see the point sensors are the 1D points within the soil are buried at depth here with these little coloured circles. But although our electrodes aren't very big, we're able to collect data across a very large area, dropping down to 10 meters depth here. So we get this great spatial resolution to see heterogeneities that you just wouldn't get in the same way with point sensors. And we're also, the point sensors are only going down to 1 meter. So we're able, with the ERT, to look a lot deeper there, which is fantastic. So just to move on to some of the data now. So this is the Malawian data with, this is repetition 2. So treatment 1 at the front here and treatment 3 in the back. And you can see here, the red line here is marking a change in time, basically, as we're moving through the time steps. And these plots at the bottom are soil water content sensors. What you can see, after some rainfall, you get the soil water content here, jumps right up, and you're seeing that also in the resistivity change images. And seeing a really heterogeneous wetting profile coming through both of these cuboidal volumes. And yeah, you're potentially seeing some lithological or pedological effects there. And you're seeing some differences between the two treatment types. If we move on to repetition 4, it's a very similar story. So early on, there's not much change, there's not a lot of rainfall, and then you can see the rain coming in here. And it'll come in over a second. So yeah, you can see this wetting up. You can see maybe it's penetrating treatment 3 faster than treatment 1. You can see potentially that lithological effect at about a meter. Looks like it might exist in these plots as well. And yeah, it potentially gets a lot deeper as well as being faster to penetrate in treatment 3 when compared to treatment 1. So I've tried to look a little bit more quantitatively at the data rather than just qualitatively. So what's done here, what you're looking at here is all of the individual time steps are plotted as an individual point here on this time series, looking at time in the x-axis. So I've isolated cells from specific depths, so 10, 30, 70, 150 and 300 centimeters depth. So interestingly, they were going below the depths of the point sensors. And I've colored these based on the treatment type. So the pinks are treatment 1, so that's conventional. The greens are treatment 3, which is conservation. So you can see that there are some differences, particularly if you look here on this left-hand side of 10 centimeters depth in sort of mid-2019, there are some differences with T3 being lower resistivity, but broadly, qualitatively, they look fairly similar. So I tried to look a little bit more into this, and I plotted up some histograms of the differences at the depth. So what I've done for each of these time steps is I've calculated the mean for all of the measurements that we have at that depth interval. And then for each time step, for every measurement we have, I've calculated the percentage difference from that mean across the entire site. And then I've plotted it up as a histogram as basically the deviation from that mean. With the green again being conservation, treatment 3, and the pink being treatment 1. I think the differences are slightly more apparent here. Well, there are definitely some overlaps, but in the near surface, it seems that the treatment 3 is potentially less resistive. At 300 centimeters depth, again, it seems that seems to be the story, but there's an interesting flipping and inversion of this at 70, 150 centimeters depth. That would be really, I think, exciting to explore why that might be. At the moment, just to be clear, this isn't soil moisture that we're looking at, this is resistivity. So there are possible pedological and lithological differences between the plots that might be influencing this. But I think it's some really interesting early results on this to try and look at this to quantify the differences. What else we've been doing? So we've been looking at co-located point sensor data. So this is soil water content data that we've been looking at here, co-located both temporally and spatially with resistivity data. And I've been plotting these for different depths. Again, these are where we have profile probe sensors, so at 10, 20, 30, 40, 60, 100 centimeters depth, with resistivity on the y-axis and volumetric water content on the x-axis. And you can see some nice relationships starting to build here between resistivity and volumetric water content. So the next step will be to actually model this with a maximum Spitz model, as you can see on the right for some other data. And from that, we'll be able to actually generate soil moisture data from the resistivity data that we're collecting instead of just showing resistivity data. And just to kind of touch on Malawi to show that we have been collecting data at all sites, although it's very early days in, and I have shown this before to the CEPHaS group. This is some plots from Malawi, some time series data. Again, you're looking at the rainbow colors at the top being resistivity and the sort of red to blue being change at the bottom. So you can see after some rainfall, we're getting some wetting. It seems to be more prevalent in the conservation plot on the right-hand side. You can see here where which plots we're looking at. And it seems to be a much stronger response basically in the conservation plot in this instance. And then it dries out a bit as time goes on, and we proceed out of the rainy season. So just to conclude, we've installed some really state-of-the-art equipment at the research stations in Zimbabwe, Malawi and Zambia, and these are going to stay as a legacy beyond the project end to keep on collecting data. I think there's some really promising results in the ERT, so there's some really interesting patterns when we start to look at the wetting fronts. And then also I think that the very first stages of the quantitative analysis are looking really interesting. And I think we definitely have a clear pathway as to what we need to do next to better understand the data and to better compare conservation agriculture and conventional agriculture with electrical resistivity tomography. Thanks very much for listening.
Very much, Russell. It's a really interesting talk and exciting to see those results from across the CEPHaS sites and to see the potential for using this technology for understanding links between the routing zone and much deeper. I'm not sure, Alessia, have we got any questions? Was there anything in the chat?
Not at the moment.
I don't think we've got any questions as yet, but there's still, of course, an opportunity for people to share questions via the chat if there's anything they'd like Russell to clarify. But thank you very much indeed for that, Russell.
Thank you.
That was very, very exciting to see. Our second speaker in this part two is B.Brauns, who is speaking again on behalf of a Working Group 3 team. And this is looking at a particular outcome from Working Group 3's measurements, which is to look at groundwater temperatures in Zimbabwe, Zambia and Malawi across the period of the project. Bencha is a hydrogeologist here at BGS, and she works on groundwater, both in Africa and also in Asia, looking at recharge and droughts and quality and impacts of agriculture. Bencha's been working on the project since early days, and now, as Alessia mentioned, also has a deputising role as project manager. So she's thoroughly engaged with the project, and we're very much looking forward to hearing what Bencha has to tell us. So thank you, Bencha.
Thank you very much, Mari, for the introduction, and welcome all to this presentation. So obviously I'm giving this presentation on behalf of our whole working group of the hydrogeology team, and I think in particularly a bit on behalf of the Zimbabwe team who initiated the topic of this talk. And the topic is rising groundwater temperatures in Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi, and this refers to some of the observations we've made at our field sites. And I should note that all these what I'm showing now is a bit food for thought and very preliminary results. Just as a reminder of what Dee and Willie as well presented early on. So as mentioned before, we set up monitoring boreholes for our hydrogeology work in the 3 research countries, specifically for this project. And we've actually been working at 4 different sites in the 3 countries, which are just shown here as a bit of a recap. So we worked at 3 research stations, which is the Chitetsu Research Station in Malawi, Domboshava in Zimbabwe, and the Limpopo Station in Zambia. And in addition to that, mostly for our team, we looked for an additional site in Zambia because for the groundwater work, it's quite important that we have a large enough area. And we felt that the Limpopo site was a bit on the small scale for us. So we tried to find another location as well. And that turned out to be a private farm, not too far away from the capital Lusaka, close to Chungwe. And you can see it here on the bottom right. And the boreholes that were installed were mostly at a depth of about 15 to 20 meters total borehole depth. A few of them were deeper, particularly to assist with the pumping test work. And we installed data loggers in all of these boreholes, both the deeper ones and particularly the shallower ones. And these data loggers, you can see one of them on the top right here in the picture, were installed mostly at about 10 to 15 meters below ground level, so that they would have a water column of about 3 to 5 meters above the loggers. And all the loggers were set at a frequency of 30 minutes. And by default, they measure both pressure, which then translates into water column above the logger, but they also measure temperature along with it. So we monitored these data from the installation of the boreholes, which was mostly in 2018, partially in 2019, until recently, or in effect, we are still monitoring. So that gives us a period of about 2 to 3.5 years monitoring. And here on the top right, you see results that Dee showed early on as well, in this case for Zimbabwe. So those are the groundwater levels that we obtained from the different sites. But we also plotted up the log temperatures in the groundwater. And when we looked at these, we were a bit puzzled because what we could see is that we have an increasing trend in all of the boreholes. We'll go into this more in depth later on, so don't be worried too much about the different colors here, which are just sort of indicating the different treatments. We'll look at that more in detail. What I should note now, though, is that you see these sort of different temperatures peak here in the graph. And that's a bit of a matter of the data cleaning, because what happens is that when we went to the field for the groundwater sampling, we needed to take the loggers out of the boreholes and then place them back into the boreholes. And just the period when the logger is outside of the borehole and equilibrating to air temperature just sort of produces these peaks, which are fairly tedious to clean up in the data set. And since we primarily focused on the groundwater level data, we haven't quite fully managed that for this particular data set. So just ignore these smaller peaks for the time being. And usually when we monitor boreholes in other projects, a lot of what we see is sort of a daily fluctuation in groundwater levels, but it's quite rare that we see such a distinct rising trend in groundwater in groundwater temperatures. And when we looked at the other sites, which I'm not going to show now, but later in the presentation, we could actually see that this trend was reflected in all the other boreholes at the 3 other monitoring sites that we had as well. So in effect, all of our borehole data showed that there was an increasing trend in groundwater temperatures, and that ranged from about 0.1 to 0.2 degrees Celsius per year. So naturally, the first question we asked ourselves was if there could be any trend, for example, in the data loggers, and if maybe we are not seeing real data. Very conveniently, we had purchased a manual dip meter for our Zimbabwe site as well, that in addition to using it to just manually cross-validate the water level data, it also recorded temperatures and salinity in groundwater. So we had a full record in about monthly intervals of salinity and temperature data from every borehole in Zimbabwe, and you see that plotted here. So different colored dots are just the different boreholes that had been logged. And this isn't the most sophisticated trend line here, but I think we can agree that it seems that there's an increasing trend in these data as well over time. So that does seem to confirm the data that we see in the log data. We also, I didn't show a plot on this here, but we also had a look at how the groundwater temperatures behaved before and after doing the water sampling, because when we do the water sampling, we effectively purge the well for a few times. So all the stagnant water in the borehole column will be removed. And we saw that before and after the water sampling, in both cases, the groundwater would show the same temperature. So in effect, we can confirm that this trend that we see is not because there's a stagnant water column in the borehole that's heating up over time, but it's actually reflecting the temperatures that we have in the surrounding aquifer at our monitoring sites. So next step then was that we've been thinking about if this could be related, for example, to air temperature changes, to either periodic changes or, for example, to climate change. So one of the things that's affecting the Southern African coastline is, for example, the Indian Ocean dipole, which is a bit of a similar system as the El Nino. It's called the Indian Nino as well, which is in effect a system that in periodic, every couple of years tends to create cooler temperatures, cooler ocean temperatures in the western part of the Indian Ocean and warmer temperatures in the eastern part, sorry, the other way around. Cooler temperatures in the eastern part and warmer temperatures in the western part, close to the African coast. And that's been reported to have an increasing effect. For example, in 2020, the droughts we saw in Southern Africa, they have been related to this. And in terms of surface temperatures, we had a first glance at a global data set. We're using the CRU data set at the moment, but I think that's certainly can be tweaked and chosen on if there are better data sets to use. And we saw a previous presentation, for example, on NASA data set as well. The CRU data set is a monthly data set at 5-degree resolution. So that's about 55 square kilometers per grid cell. And it was developed from weather station data and then interpolated for the grid cells where there's no data available. It's freely available on the internet and does have a nice long time period. So at the moment, you can download data from 1901 to 2020 for all sorts of parameters as well, not just for temperatures. And this slide is just showing a summary of the temperatures, the temperature evolution from 1901 to 2020 for the 3 countries. So this is data integrated on national scale for Zimbabwe on the top, Malawi in the center, and Zambia on the bottom. We pulled out this data from the World Bank website, Climate Knowledge Portal, which is a very convenient site to sort of have a brief overview of the CRU data set because they're producing a lot of information and data plots using the CRU data set. So that's what this is based on. And on the right-hand side, you see indicated the CEPHaS monitoring period broadly, during which we logged our boreholes. And what you can see here is that there seems to be an increasing trend in air surface temperatures over the past decades, mostly starting in about 1960s to 1980s and going on from there. The blue line, by the way, is the annual mean, and the smooth line, the black line, is the 5-year rolling average. And again, from the same website, I just extracted a few sort of summary sentences on the data evolution. So for Zimbabwe, it's stated that mean temperature is increasing by roughly a rate of 0.03 degrees Celsius per year from the 70s onwards to 2016, actually. So not quite in recent years, which is interesting compared to our data. In Malawi, it's reported that there's a continual increase in mean air temperatures, and in Zambia, likewise, they report a rate of 0.34 degrees Celsius per decade, so corresponding to the rate that's observed in Zimbabwe as well. So there seems to be a correspondence between what we see in the groundwater to some degree to what's happening on the air surface temperatures. We have not looked at land surface temperatures as such at the moment yet, but that certainly could be something interesting to look at as well. And coming back now to our data that I mentioned earlier on, and here a bit more in detail. So we've got the 4 plots here for the 4 different countries. So we've got Malawi on the top left, and Zimbabwe top right, and the 2 Zambian sites on the bottom. Generally, so each line is a line for one of the boreholes, and the green lines correspond to the conservation agriculture site, and the brown lines correspond to the conventional tilled sites. You can see there are a few other colors here as well. So for example, at the Limpopo sites, our boreholes are in effect a bit on the side of the CA plot, just not to disturb the soil and the other measurements from the other teams. So it's likely influenced by sort of the surrounding land as well. So we can't purely call it a CA plot. That's why it's called other here. A similar borehole does exist in Zimbabwe as well. And then we've got one borehole in Zimbabwe as well in a woodlot area. So a bit more of a shaded area. And that's a black line on the Zimbabwe plot. And I think what you can see on all the data plots is that you have this rising trend, really in good correspondence across all sites, across somewhat similar rates as well. I mentioned early on that the peaks are a matter of data cleaning, as are these step changes that you can see on the bottom right in the Zambia data set. So you see there are a few step changes, and those actually relate to adjustments in the loggers. So sometimes, if, for example, a string broke or so, the logger might have needed to be adjusted, and depending on where the logger sat in the borehole, there was a slight shift in the groundwater temperature. What we think is quite interesting on these, though, is that continuing to look at this Kabaleka data on the bottom right, is that in some cases we have quite a distinction between sort of the absolute temperature of the groundwaters between the 2 treatments, between the conservation agriculture and the tilled sites. So the temperatures are increasing at the same rate pretty much, but it seems that the absolute temperature might differ with the land treatment. And on the top right, for example, at the Zimbabwe side, that black line is the one that plots lowest, which, as I mentioned, it's in a woodlot area, so it will be a bit more shaded, and that seems to be reflected in the groundwater temperatures as well. I think maybe the last thing to note on this one is that for 3 of the charts, you see that the curves are relatively straight, versus for the Zimbabwe data, you can see that it's a bit more wavy than for the other sites. And these waves actually seem to correspond a bit to recharge events. So maybe this data could be used as well to inform on recharge processes within the aquifers. So that's just sort of a snapshot on what we've seen there, and we thought that was just interesting data to share, and as I said, food for thought, and maybe to look a bit more deeply into this. So in summary, at all our monitoring sites, we see an increase in trend and groundwater temperatures at a rate of about 0.1 to 0.2 degrees over quite a short period of monitoring, so from 2018 to 2021 mostly. And this rate is actually possibly a bit higher than what we see in the surface temperatures, but that needs to be validated. So it could be a response to the increasing surface temperatures. And we do want to have a further comparison with local air temperatures and or soil or surface temperatures. That will be useful. And we do have more CEPHaS data from the other working groups for that. So we'll continue to have a look at that. As I mentioned on the previous slides, there seems to be a difference between land use treatments. So that might affect the absolute temperatures, at least in the sort of shallow groundwaters that we are looking at here. And in terms of implications, why could this be interesting? So, for example, we know that microbial activities and also the microbial survival, what type of microbes develop in groundwater is temperature dependent. So changes in groundwater temperatures could influence that. And to continue this work, it would be great to continue monitoring on one hand, of course, to extend our own data series, but also to see if we can obtain additional long-term groundwater temperature time series. And if anyone is watching this and has this data available, maybe for comparison, that would be great. And I think with that, I conclude the presentation. So just thanks to everyone listening, and of course, acknowledgements to our funder, and as well to all my colleagues who've been really a joy to work with over the past years. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Bencha. There's a question from Richard who says, do the differences at Chavula in temperature have any bearing on the differences in the isotope ratios that were measured there?
So we saw different composition in isotopes in Chavula between the two different sites, and in this case we see different absolute temperatures, but we don't see a difference in behavior. So it does correspond, as in we see a difference between the treatments in both cases, but it does not correspond as in for the isotope data. We actually see different data, which pretty much one of the explanations for that could be, for example, that the recharge occurs at a different time at the CA site at Chavula than at the tilt site. So for example, it's maybe the heavier rainstorms impact more on one of the systems and less on the other systems. The temperature data, as I said, you have a difference in absolute temperature, but the trend looks the same. So it does not point directly that much in the same direction, as in we don't see increases at a different time. So the Zimbabwe data, for example, we saw this sort of wavy behavior. We don't see sort of more wavy behavior in one of the treatments at Chavula, but not in the other. So not quite the same, but it's both. I think in a nutshell, it's interesting that we see the strongest differences between the treatments, both for our isotope measurements as well as for these data. And I think just sort of from the visual impact of the site, that does seem to make sense, because as I said, it's a farm site and it's been quite long established. So the CA system there has been established for, I think, about 15 years. And just from my personal impression, it seems to be one of the sites where all three key principles of CA seem to be followed quite closely. And you can see, for example, a lot of crop residue really on the field. And the size of the plot is quite large as well. So I think from our hydrogeology perspective, it's probably one of our best research sites that we have at Chavula.
Thank you. I suppose, I mean, it was an interesting point you raised in your slide about possible impacts on microbial activity and also on various water quality measurements. So I suppose this is something which the CEPHaS project might push for increased monitoring of whether groundwater that communities are depending on, whether there might be associated trends in microbial hazards or other quality measures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in general, we haven't looked, the focus of this project hasn't been the groundwater quality, but I think that could be a very natural follow-on on our project and on the data we have, because maybe the groundwater temperature as well as the indications in the recharge, the sort of feeling that maybe we get a slightly earlier recharge peak at the CA sites than at the other sites, or from different rainfalls, that of course can highly influence contaminant transport as well, particularly if fertilizers or herbicides are applied. So if some of the rainstorms that happen quite soon after fertilizer application have more of an impact on one of the systems or less on the other system, that would be important, as well as some of the results from the soils group, for example, on macropores. Macropores will transport water more faster down into the aquifer, so nutrients might have less time to degrade. So the whole sort of nutrient and contamination issue, quality issue, would be a very natural follow on this work.
Thank you very much indeed, Bencha. I don't think we've got any other questions. So thanks again for a really interesting extra dimension to what Working Group 3 have been looking at.
Thank you, Marthe.
Our final, excuse me, Our final presentation for the meeting is from Dr. Shepherd Saziba, who's an agricultural economist at the University of Zimbabwe. So this, I think, completes our overview of CEPHaS in terms of the interdisciplinary capacity that we have by bringing in agricultural economics. Dr. Saziba works at UZ, as I say, along with Florence Mtambanengwe, who's the Zimbabwe country lead, who has a particular interest in farming systems, and with Toba Mapangisana, who has also been working alongside Shepherd on the economic component of the CEPHaS project. Shepherd is particularly interested in adoption and economics of agricultural technologies, understanding their impact and the significance for rural development, and looking at food and nutrition security. And he's going to be talking about an evaluation of labour use in conservation agriculture, focusing on smallholder farming systems in Zimbabwe. Thank you very much, Shepherd.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much, Prof. Lack, for the introduction. Yes, as has been already said, I'm Shepherd Saziba from the University of Zimbabwe, and I will be presenting work that we have been doing under the work of 6 with colleagues whom I would like to acknowledge now, Prof. Florence Mtambanengwe and Toga Mapangisana. Our topic is an evaluation of labor use in conservation agriculture, a case of smallholder farming system in Zimbabwe. Right? Okay, this is my layout. I'll briefly motivate the study through an introduction, then outline the specific objectives of the study, go on to explain a few items on methodology, and then I will give the results and a few key messages coming from this study. Okay, as a way to motivate this study, we know climate change, we are receiving a lot of shocks from climate change, changes in rainfall, temperature, and so on. And we also know that there's increasing concern for environmental degradation, and our current conventional farming system is not going to be sustainable, and therefore the introduction of conservation agriculture should be a really appropriate technological response for farming at this point in time. We have seen evidence from experimental trials, on-farm research, that show really that CA has significant yield and environmental benefits. The numbers, the figures are speaking positively about this technology. And then we know that the CA is a suite of practices, and that has to be carefully sequenced in terms of space and time. Yeah, and we've earlier on from Dr. Tefel's presentation, we came to realize that there are many versions of conservation agriculture that smallholder farmers are practicing. Some of it by default, because they are failing to fully adopt some of the components because of their complex socio-economic context. We know their constraints in terms of finance, in terms of resources, in terms of knowledge, and so on. And
Shepherd,
we know in this region, hello?
Shepherd, sorry, the presentation doesn't seem to be moving on our screen, on the shared screen. Thank you.
Thank you for the tip. Okay, I was on the point that yes, despite concerted effort over the last 2 decades to promote conservation agriculture in the region, Southern Africa particularly, we still unfortunately see very low rates of adoption And in some safe cases, we are seeing farmers disadopting conservation agriculture. You know, there seems to be a contradiction here, a paradox. We know it's a performing technology, but farmers are not, you know, taking it up as we expect. One of the things that most studies ignored is the issue of labor, which is quite important because one of the main reasons given by farmers for the constraint in adoption of conservation agriculture is labor, and this is what is motivating this study. We really want to go and measure the amount of labor that is used in conservation agriculture and compare it to the conventional system. And after measuring the amount of labor, we want to run a simple, economic assessment, very basic, a partial budget to see if there are any, net economic benefits of, for farmers to switch over to CA. So this is mainly what we did in this study. In terms of methodology, we gathered the measurement of labor from focus group discussion with two farmer groups, and both were good representations of both male and female farmers, and this was done in Omboshawa in 2014, and we used one of the recommended methods to elicit the time taken to accomplish a farming tax, which is the farmer loans. Farmers were asked to profile the activities, the tasks that they typically do for the two types of farming systems, that is CA and conventional. And then after profiling the tasks, we asked them to give us, the estimates of time that it will take to accomplish each of those tasks, and we converted this to man hours, and then later on we convert as well to labor days. So I'll quickly, give some results that explain or contextualize the site that we studied. Maize was the dominant crop grown by farmers as expected. Farmers had about 6 years experience, trying or adopting CA, and also farmers at that stage were practicing CA on very small plots, less than an acre. Most were on 0.5 acres, and the reference cropping season 2013-14 was relatively an average to a poor season. In the community, most farmers did not own, only a few owned cattle. And then I just want to say a few remarks about the tasks that farmers were involved in for conservation agriculture. I'll start off with the planting basins. The planting basins. Hello.
Apologies, sorry, I'm jumping in again. We are still on slide 5 on the screen. I believe you've moved to your slide 6.
Okay, I think it's failing this side.
Yeah.
Maybe you can run it.
Would you like me to share on your behalf? Yes.
Please,
okay. If you just stop sharing, then I shall start at this end. Thank you.
All right. Okay. I'm just going to talk about planting basins. Just some few remarks before I actually present results or findings on the amount of labor that was involved. This activity was staggered over a period of 4 months, and it's largely related to the intensity of that are involved in this activity. That was from July to October. Most farmers, there's capacity or strength to cover only 0.5 acres, and farmers relied on family labor. Most of them, 70%, very few were able to hire. Hard labor for planting basins tried something up to about $16 per 0.5 acres, or the equivalent in kind of 4 buckets of maize grain. And normally this task is taken up by very poor families who are trying to survive as a coping mechanism. It's not a really desirous task. And then I would also move on, sorry. Yes, I'll talk about mulching. At the time when we were doing this study, farmers had serious challenges with mulching biomass or mulching material, because it was very scarce around the villages. The maize stover produced was very little, and if left in situ, would be grazed by roaming livestock or blown away by wind. Those who would prefer to use the stover as supplemental feed to their animals. So, around 80% were not practicing any mulching with basins at all. Our farmers did acknowledge that weed pressure was significantly reduced when out-of mulch is used. Those using mulch had to gather grass, cut grass all over the village, and other, biomass material so that they could mulch. And they had to do this activity around March and June when this, the biomass was still relatively available. Yes, next slide. All right, and then I wish to talk about weeding. Yeah, it was predominantly done manually with hand hoes, though there were some few farmers who had cattle and were using also drawn cultivators as a way of weeding. Very few farmers, 2%, used herbicides at all. And some of the reasons that were offered were unaffordability and the lack of knowledge of the herbicides. Without mulch, normally farmers ended up weeding 3 times because there was a lot of weed pressure. With mulching, farmers do not use hand hoes to weed, but normally would pull out a few weeds that emerge through the thick mulch carpets. And the wage rate for weeding at that time was quoted at $5 for 1 bucket of maize grain per labor day. And the labor day was around 75 hours. I will use this information later on. If you could move on. Right, here I now present the total times each task took for farmers, comparison of conservation agriculture and our conventional ox plow. I think I've also placed there for your own information the timing of these activities. I think one thing, if you can take note, is that CA has actually expanded the pharmacy activity calendar. It has added, 3 months. Now farmers have to be busy throughout the year, from July to June, because they have to start digging the basins starting in July. And this may not be so, preferable to farmers, since they also want a season normally to rest. So in terms of labor hours, let me just, maybe if you can move on, it's easier to show when there are graphs. Can we move on? Next slide. Right, you can see that, weeding, if you don't mulch with the CA system, weeding will take a lot of labor hours. In case of 0.5 acre plots, this would take you an equivalent of 70 man-hours. And also mulching, if you please note there, it took almost the same amount of time. So collection of mulch is quite, taking up a lot of farmers' time, and it is timed at a period, perhaps, which is not so desirable for farmers. The same applies to digging of basins. But when it comes to conventional ox plow, you can also notice that weeding is still a very laborious activity. It is taking almost equally the same amount of time, 70. If you don't use a kettle to do the cultivate with the cultivator. So if you are using a totally manual system, you have to input a lot of human manpower in terms of weeding. But if you involve animals to weed with the cultivator, you only have to weed only 2 times, and then you reduce your labor hours by almost 50%. So the same thing is also happening to CA. If you mulch, you reduce significantly your weeding time. If you could look where it is written there, weeding with mulch, it is only taking less than 20 man days. But then you would have to collect a lot of mulch, which takes a lot of time, which is about 70 many hours. So I think what we can notice here is that weeding, mulching, and digging of basins are very laborious activities, and they have high drudgery for farmers. Now, if we can move on and see the implications of this. Right now, we have separated the 2 possible subsystems of each of the cropping systems. For conventional, if farmers don't have access to the calc data, we have looked at the implications on the total labor. We have also looked at the case where they have access to animals that can do the draft weeding, and there's quite a huge difference in the 2 subsystems of conventional ox plow. If you have access to draft power and you can include weeding with the calc data, you actually have only to use 49 labor days per hectare to grow your maize. While if you don't have access to that power, and the weeds pressure is high, you then have to do almost twice, 86 man days per hectare. When you come to conventional agriculture, the same scenario plays out. If you have you put enough mulch, but that activity is also taking a lot of your energy. You have 130 labor days to complete production of maize. But if you don't mulch, you reduce the labor for collecting and gathering grass, but then you have to weed more hours, and then in total you are only having 170 labor days, which is not a surprise. Maybe that's why maybe farmers are not even bothering to collect mulch if they can't find it, because it takes less labor days actually to grow maize with the no mulching up to 170. So to me, what is emerging there is that if you have an opportunity to substitute away any manual task towards some form of mechanization, be it even be driven by draft animals, you reduce a lot of the weeding pressure in the production of maize. Now what is left is for us to say, this assuming everything else does not change, what is the overall economic implication for farmers if they are to switch to CA from conventional farming? Then we need to bring in the yield levels. At the time where we did this survey, yields, CA yields were much higher than ox plow yields perhaps as expected. The farmers were getting per hectare up to 2.1 tons for CA and only 1.7 per hectare for the ox plow. So we move on to do really a simple assessment to check whether from the farmer's point of view it is worthwhile to switch over to CA. It's a trade-off between your yield and your labor. So if you could move on, please. Then we really do a really basic buffer budget, and in this case we compared, because most of the farmers did not have access to draft power. So we compared a CA system where there's no there's no weeding using draft power. So in the end, you have an additional yield gain of 0.4 tons with CA or over conventional. And then you have additional 31 main days, which I've explained earlier. You have to pay an equivalent of a wage rate of $5 per day or 4 buckets. This is the opportunity cost of that level of those 31 main days. And most of it anyway is associated with the weeding and the planting of basins. So a simple, just a basic trade-off there is showing us that farmers will incur a net loss of US $5 per hectare by simply, moving to CA relative to conventional system. So perhaps this is not, this might explain why perhaps it's not easy for farmers to adopt CA. And this means that yes, it is a performing technology, but we have to do something to correct or to minimize the labor drudgery. If you could move on to the next one. So the key message is here from this very basic, simple study is that labor for digging basins, weeding and gathering out present a bottleneck to economic return to CA in the small water setting is given by this study. So this, possibly explains the low adoption rate we are observing among smallholder farmers. The ox drone plowing and weeding has much lower labor hours, which may make it very difficult for farmers who have access to cattle to adopt CA, because you're substituting some form of mechanical power with the human power, and this is very undesirable naturally for farmers. And then when you look at the mulch as a challenge, our systems are semi-arid, and it's not easy to gather or to preserve maize stover on the fields, because farmers, our grazing system, the animals are roaming, and it's not easy for farmers to fence up their fields. So this really becomes one of the stumbling blocks in terms of increasing mulch to the levels that would really reduce weeds for farmers. Then we know that websites can be used to correct for the weed pressure, but due to financial constraints and knowledge gap, a lot of farmers were really scared of websites because they had no knowledge of websites. They thought they would burn their crops and so on. So I think this calls for a more extension efforts in terms of messages that would promote uptake of CA. And lastly, there is really a need to come up with the economic or mechanization options for farmers, because we've seen that, I think, in the view of farmers, just having access to draft animals, it really takes away a lot of drudgery for them. So if CA is to really compete with conventional farming, we need to come up with economic or mechanization options. I think this is where things are moving in this area, particularly in Zimbabwe. The government is seeking solutions for appropriate technologies so that farmers can mechanize and cover more larger areas, and hence realize what we know the potential, because the economic potential of this technology. So in a nutshell, that's what I would say we are presenting, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Shepherd, for a very interesting overview of what's clearly some critical issues for the adoption of conservation agriculture. So we've got a couple of questions. Firstly, from Keston Jira. He says, did you have a chance to compare with a CA system that does not involve digging planting basins and looking at the implications of that for the activity calendar? And indeed, the second question from Chris Chagamara is also related to that. So we're saying, what if farmers were using ripper lines rather than basins? How do you think that would affect the results you get on the labour hours required.
Should I proceed to take on this?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kirsten, for the questions. Yes, true. In our case, at the time we did this study, there were no farmers who were using the other mechanized the reaper and so on, CA options. And most were using basins, and therefore we could not gather that information. But if you are to ask me what would be the scenario if we include these systems, I think it would swing a long way in the favor of CA, because in that case you have already reduced some of the dredgery, a large part of the dredgery. We saw those graphs. Digging basins is a large component of the labor. So if you take away that, certainly the scenario would improve a lot.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I think I don't think we've got any more questions. So thank you very much again, Shepherd, for that extra dimension, which of course shows how CEPHaS has been looking across the range of issues that are potentially limiting on conservation agriculture and relevant to its impacts and potential success. So that was our final presentation on the final day of this conference. And I'd like to thank everyone very much for attending, for their participation. And I shall be handing over to Alessia, I think, with some final remarks before we finish.
Thank you, Murray. I just wanted to thank everybody for attending and coming and joining us for the 3 days. I'd like to remind you all that I will be sending out a feedback form, and I really hope that you can fill it out and return it for us. I would also endeavour to make the recordings available wherever possible, and we will post the Q&As as well, so that we will be able to show all the answers that weren't captured during the presentations. And if anybody has got any other questions, please submit them to our email address or myself, and I shall pass them on. I would like to thank everybody in the project team. This has been a fantastic project. It still is. So we still got a few very active months to go. And most of all, I'd like to thank Professor Murray Lark, who was our PI and has been the mastermind behind this fantastic setup, this partnership. You can see on the screen the various working groups and how we have been sort of brought together to look at the strengthening capacity from various aspects with regard to conservation agriculture. I think it has been a fantastic journey for everybody involved. We've seen, especially in the Working Group 5 presentation, how much we have all learned and taken away from this experience. And also, I'd like to thank everybody, because these have been very unprecedented and challenging times. And everybody has been fantastic and carried on working despite the challenges. I would like to also quickly thank my predecessor, Fiona McVoy, because she was the mastermind in the project management sort of team up until recently, when she then left BGS to join a new organization to start a new venture. I would also like to thank, could I have the next slide, please, all our project partners and collaborators, We have, as I said, we have all learned so much throughout this journey. And I would like to say a special thank to Delta D Devices as well. They have been one of our suppliers that have been with us since the beginning of this journey, and throughout this time have continued to support us remotely to ensure that all our equipment on site is functioning and able to do what is meant to do. I would also like to thank, apart from all the speakers and all the contributed to the presentation, and of course our external speakers, I would like to thank all the people in the field. We have still got a lot of work that is being undertaken, and there's a lot of people that are out in the field and they're doing an amazing job. So we are very, very grateful for all your hard work. As I said, the pandemic has put a strain on all our lives, and I would like to thank all of you for your continued efforts and our hard work. Also a thank you to all the team members that have moved on since the inception of CEPHaS. We appreciate all the work that they have done as well, and recognize that their input has also been crucial for the outputs that we have managed to create and present this week. Lastly, if I can just have the next slide, I have had a little play with the world map to show where everybody who has joined us in the past 3 days was placed, and it's fantastic to see how much we have reached in the world, despite all being in those places and not together, which perhaps is not a bad thing, because we have saved on CO2 emissions. So the pandemic has not all been bad. And also we have stuck to the value for money value that this program, the GCRF, was advocating when they funded our project. So I'm sure they would be grateful as well that we've managed to organize such an event at such a low cost. I'd like to thank you all as well, because given that you are in such different places, I appreciate the time difference. So thank you so much for joining us from wherever you are at whatever time you have had to join us. With that, I would like to just say thank you to everybody who's been involved in organizing the conference, especially Venture, who is sitting behind me and has been fantastic in facilitating the Q&A, the chat, and everything else to do with the organization of the conference. I would like to think that this is, although CEPHaS is coming to an end, this is the start of a journey and not the end. And I hope that all the questions, findings and answers that have been part of these presentations will find a new path to be answered in new ways, and that the collaboration can carry on in some way. So thank you, everyone. I don't know if Mari wants to say anything else.
I'd just like to thank Alessia for everything that she's done during her time with the project, and particularly since Fiona left us, stepping up and taking on the lead as project manager, and to Venture for all the support that she's given Alessia in that as well, on top of her existing commitments within Working Group 3. So thank you to everyone, to our country leads, not forgetting the teams still out in the field in Malawi at the moment and preparing for some of the additional installations to be done in Zambia and Zimbabwe too. So thank you everyone, and thank you for joining us. And I hope you've found the conference useful to get an overview of all that we've done. So thank you, and we'll be in touch. But for the moment, goodbye.